Some weeks I wish we could just end right there. And for me, today is one of those days. And it wasn't just because of the music, it's also partly because I am just exhausted. But before we get into that, let's back up. Today we're kicking off a brand new message series called Prophecies of Hope. And let me give you a little backstory on it. Actually, a lot of Seventh-day Adventist churches in this area are starting something called Prophecies of Hope this weekend. And for a lot of churches, it's doing something 4 or 5 nights a week for the next 4 or 5 weeks. And as our staff talked about it, prayed about it, discussed it for not very long, we said, we're just going to do some Sabbath morning things. And instead of focusing on all these different prophecies, that sometimes we think of the word prophecy, and for some of us it's a scary thing, and we think of all the scary stuff. And our take was, if it's really about prophecies of hope, we ought to look at some prophecies of hope from the Bible. Because that's really where we think is the most important thing. Things that'll get us through those days, things that'll keep us going when we don't feel like we can go any longer. And so that's really, in my mind, what this whole word prophecy or to prophesy. To prophesy simply means to foretell, to forecast, to predict something before it happens. And there's a reason, and we'll look at actually some of Jesus' words here in a little bit of why those predictions are there. And they're not so much to tell us we're getting close to arriving or to prove something. They're simply there to validate something that already ought to be there. But they're about forecasting, and we're all familiar with forecasting living here in the D.C. area, right? Amen. And I hope we don't have any weathercasters in our room this morning, but they don't do a very good job, do they? And thankfully, we have a greater forecaster who at times gives us glimpses into what things are going to take place. But that's typically what we think about when it means to prophesy, is this idea of foretelling something. But there's another definition for it. It means to tell forth something from God. And the reality is, our church was involved in a prophetic event last weekend. As close to 200 people came together to put on and to help people understand, and more than understand, but to experience the story of Jesus. Through what we call Easter, the story of hope. And again, I want to thank all of you that were part of that, who helped make that happen. But that last weekend, and actually all the weeks leading up to last weekend, are why I have been just exhausted this whole week. I just haven't been able to catch up. Monday is normally my sermon prep day. I stay at home and kind of work on that. And I prepped for about an hour and a half on our passage this morning with my eyes closed, laying on my couch. Deep study, Dave, by the way. But I was just, and it just kind of has been there. And I tell you that simply because it's a reality that happens sometimes. Some weeks are just better than others, and some weeks you're just tired. And Debbie Howe, who prayed for us earlier, she played Mary, the mother of Jesus, last weekend. And I appreciate Debbie. Debbie came up Sunday night after we're all done. And she said, if I have any power left while I have this costume on, I give you permission to take some time off this week. Which I said, thank you, Mary, Mother of Jesus, for that. But I said, Sabbath has this amazing craziness to it that it comes back on a regular pattern every week after week after week. And, everybody was involved in it, so it's not like I can say, hey, Pastor Jason, hey, Pastor Ann, I'm tired, you pick it up, because they were both doing a lot of stuff, so this is where we're at. And there's this great line that Vince Lombardi, a great famous football coach, said years ago, and that is, fatigue makes cowards of us all. And it's true. When we get fatigued, when we get tired, it's easy to sort of back off from stuff or not to own some things. It's easy for us to just kind of let discouragement take over us. And my kind of feelings this week actually connect with the prophecy of hope we're going to look at today. A prophecy that if you've been around a church very much, you have heard at some point, and it may be a very meaningful one to you, of Jesus' promise that he is getting a place ready for you and for me. And there's a moving part of it. But in the context it comes in this context of a group of disciples who are just worn out. They're tired. And they're tired because they're trying to make sense of everything Jesus is saying, and Jesus has now sort of shifted his focus from kind of being the kingdom of God here on this planet and healing people and doing all this stuff and kind of building up to something. And now he begins to say, it's not going to end quite the way they've thought it's going to end. And they're at the midst of experience sort of what this cowardly thing is. And there's a statement I said last week as we looked at the Easter story, that this whole statement, this whole prophecy today actually comes from that Easter story, and it was this. It's hard to see the bigger picture when your picture seems so big. And I know it's true for you because it's true for me. And it's not just true for you because it's true for me, it's true for all of us. And at times our pictures get so big that they're all we see because they're so close to us. We miss the bigger picture out there. And that's not to say that that's wrong. It's just what happens to us. And it's so easy for us that all of our stuff shrinks things down to my lowest common denominator, which is my stuff and what I'm struggling with, or what I wish, or what I hope. And I think this speaks to the idea of prophecy. Prophecy is really about big picture stuff. But at times we can miss the big picture because our picture seems so big, and so God has to speak this idea of, but wait, there is this bigger picture, and there's some ideas behind it. And the reality is that God's picture doesn't mean he doesn't care about your picture. Don't get me wrong on that. Because sometimes we want to just go to write the big picture. You don't really matter. Let's stay on God's picture. But your picture and my picture do matter to God. And we've all been around those people, they're going through something and we think, really? That's your problem? You want to hear problems. Let me go introduce you to some people, right? But we all know what it's like when it's our problem, right? And prophecy is a reminder, not that don't worry about your problems, God's got bigger problems. It's just the fact that God wants you to know he cares about those things and that God is in control, especially, say it with me, especially when it looks like he isn't. Because that's kind of what prophecy is about, especially some of the ones that are forecasting this idea of foretelling what's going to take place. At those times when people say, where are you, God? What's going on? That God says, you just need to know. You need to know I'm still in control, even though at the moment, or for the next X amount of years, or for quite a while, it won't seem like it. I still want you to know I'm in control. And so that's where we're going to go. We're going to actually look at John chapter 14 today. If you have a Bible, a regular Bible or one of your phone kind of things, you can get over there. But before we go there, I'm going to invite you just to bow your heads and ask you to pray with me one more time, okay? Father, we just stop to recognize your presence, not only in this room this morning, but in our lives. And I pray you would help our eyes to be more wide open, our hearts to be a little more open, our lives to be a little bit more open to that reality. And instead of looking for all those things, just to recognize that truth, that your presence in our life. And it's one of the reasons you've given us prophecies from thousands of years ago that still matter today. They're just to remind us again that you're present. And for that person this morning who just needs to know you right at this moment that you're present, I pray that you would do something to help them catch that glimpse today. Because while all of us at times need to know your presence, there's somebody here this morning that definitely needs to know that you're present in their life. Because it doesn't seem very clear at this moment. And I would just ask that this story from a couple thousand years ago of some people that your son gathered together would remind us again of just what it means to hear your foretelling and your telling forth. You're speaking your words of prophecy into our lives. And so speak them now in your name. Amen. Little backstory to John chapter 14. This is kind of right in the heart of the Easter story. Jesus and the guys have gotten to Jerusalem. They're having Passover meal this night. It's just a few hours away from Jesus getting arrested and the whole kind of chaos of the next couple of days, this whole weekend, and in just a few hours is going to break forth. And that's important to note because this prophecy, this promise of hope comes in the midst of that, and so often we hear it and we don't think about sort of that backstory. But it's important to know that backstory so that we can better appreciate what this prophecy is about. But here's the setting. They have just had this kind of meal, and Jesus has just turned to Judas and said, hey, do what you got to do, and he's gone out to do what he's going to do, and they're not really sure what that all means. The rest of the disciples, it says they didn't really understand it till later. And then Jesus begins to get kind of serious with them. And he says, listen, guys, it's going to get really bad for the next few hours. And I'm going to have to go to a place that you guys can't go. To which Peter, as if you know much about the story, Peter's the guy that's always glad to speak up. Peter says, Jesus, let me let you know, I can go wherever you're going. I'm going to be your man because I would even die for you. Great statement, right? To which Jesus says, I wish that was true, Peter. But I got some bad news for you. Not only will you not die for me, before we get to the morning, you're going to deny you even know me. Not just once, not just twice, but 3 times. You're going to distance yourself farther and farther away from me. And I know you feel like at the moment you would do anything. But fatigue, the weariness, the weight of all the stuff is going to make a coward of you. And it's in that context, after Jesus saying those words, that he says these words, don't be troubled. You trust God? Now trust in me. And if you've read this passage before, oftentimes we think, don't let your heart be troubled, and we think, okay, don't let things kind of weigh me down. But in the context, Jesus is talking specifically to Peter, but to the whole group, and says, listen, don't let that agitate you, Peter, when I say you're going to deny me. Don't let it get so worked up that you kind of get lost on track. It's going to happen. I'm telling you, it's a prophecy. It's going to happen, but don't let that kind of get you so shaken up that you go lost off course. Because you believe God. And I want you to believe in me as well. Then he makes this incredible statement. There are many rooms in my Father's house. Now, some of you, if you've grown up around a church and grown up around the King James Version of the Bible, you remember it says there are many mansions in my Father's house, right? Which I don't know how you get a bunch of mansions inside somebody's house, right? It doesn't quite make sense, but we love the idea of mansions. I got a shack here. I got a home with wheels on it here, but up there, I'm going to have me a mansion, right? I'm going to have me a mansion. That has nothing to do with what this is talking about. When he says there are many rooms in my Father's house, you know what Jesus means? There are many rooms in my Father's house, right? It's like this big apartment complex. And for those of you who live in an apartment right now, you're going, really? Oh, that sucks, come on. I want to get out. I want to get a place of my own. I want to have a lot of acreage. I want to have all these animals, they'll be in heaven, have everything. But you have to understand, in the context of who Jesus was talking to, that's how it worked. Ladies, when you met a guy, Becky, when you met him, fell in love with Jimmy. Who couldn't look at him, You know what that meant? You weren't going to have a house with a white picket fence out in the country. He was going to go home after he proposed to you, and he's going to begin adding on to his Father's house. He's going to build another room. You might get a kitchen. You might have to share the kitchen with your mother-in-law. Now, I don't know your mother-in-law at all. But I know for some mother-in-laws and some daughter-in-laws, that's not a great picture. But that is the picture it had, because their family was everything. And to be invited into the family was just how it worked. You just keep adding on to the family. Peter, your house keeps getting bigger, and they just keep getting more and more there. And that's what he says, in my Father's house, there's many rooms, because they keep getting added on. This is how, because we're one big family. He says, I'm going to go prepare a place for you. That's where I'm going now. And that's why I say you can't go, because this is kind of this whole wedding language. Because if a guy proposed to a girl, his job between the time when he proposed and the time they had the wedding, back then they didn't say, okay, I'm proposing now, and let's say we're going to get married on September 19th. Is that when our anniversary is? 18th. I was close. Don't go. We have a policy in my house. I am always within 3 days of any important birthday or anniversary. I got my holidays down pretty well, but those things, as long as I'm in the ballpark, I got stuff on hand, so I'm ready, within 3 days. I already got the stuff, Dave, so I'm covered, because if it pops up a day early, I go, oh, I was just waiting, But back then, you would not say, this is the day we're getting married. It was going to be a surprise. You remember the story Jesus tells? The bridegrooms, they're all kind of waiting up. They get tired of waiting up because the guy keeps taking too long because he hasn't finished the house yet. He hasn't finished the room yet. He's finished. When he gets the house done, then he goes, surprise! And she goes, oh, I'm not ready yet, I don't know how it works, wedding dresses and getting all your makeup done and how long you had to keep it done. But that's the picture. It's sort of this weird thing. But Jesus says, listen, there's lots of rooms. And if there wasn't lots of rooms, I would have told you there's not lots of rooms. But I'm going to go prepare this place for you. And if it's not so, I would have told you. But that's where I'm going. And when I tell you, Peter, I'm going someplace you can't go because it's not ready for you yet. But when it's ready, I'm going to do something. When everything is ready, I'm going to come and get you so that you'll always be with me where I am. So when I get a cell set up for you, I'm going to come back and we're going to go together because I got a place for you. You're going to be part of this bigger family. It's all going to work out together. And so Jesus, he's telling these folks, he's saying, in the midst, I'm going to leave and go do something, but it's an important thing. And if I don't go, there's no place, and if there's no place, you can't go either. So I'm going to go do a job, so when I get done, I'm going to come get you. And you know where I'm going. And you know how to get there. Now, Jesus is saying this. So when Jesus says something, it is true, right? So he says, you know where I'm going, and you know how to get there. To which one of the disciples, Thomas, says, I got no clue. Lord, we don't know. We haven't any idea where you're going. So if we don't know where you're going, how do we know how to get there? If I say, come over to my house, okay, I got to find out where Mike's house is. But I would say, hey, we're going to get together, and I'll see you there. Don't be late. Give me something, right? Give me some idea of where it is so I can figure out how to get there. And he says, we don't know what Jesus, come on. We don't have any clue what you're talking about. And Jesus said, no, you do know, right? And he says, no, I don't know. To which Jesus says, I am the way, I am the truth, and I am the... He says, so you really do. I've told you where I'm going. Going to heaven, my Father's house. I'm adding on a bunch of stuff. When it's done, I'll come back and get you. And the way is through me. No one, he says, can come to the Father except through me. And sometimes we as Christians get a little sort of embarrassed by that and think, well, there's got to be some other ways. What about the people who never heard of Jesus? Blah, blah, blah. We got to get a God. But think about this. If Jesus really is God in the flesh, then he can clearly say there's no other way to get to the Father except through me, because he's going to tell you in just a second, we're together in this. We're one in this process. In fact, he goes on, if you had known who I am, then you would have known who my Father is. And he's not chastising him. He's not saying, if you would have known bad. He's just saying, listen, this is how it works. If you really know me, you would have known who my Father was. From now on, you know him, and you've seen him. To which we all reading it go, duh, right? When we read this passage, we go, what is the matter with these idiots? These are guys that have been with Jesus for like 3.5 years now. And when I say been with him, they have been 24/7 hanging around with Jesus, because that's what disciples do. They find their rabbi, and if the rabbi, he gets up, you get up. If he wipes his nose like this, you wipe your nose like this. Not like that, you got to go like that, right? Because that's what the rabbi does. They've been watching Jesus. They've been mimicking Jesus. They've been they've been doing everything that Jesus does. They've been trying to learn, and not just learn, but also not just learn the why, but how. That's, how he does it, why he does it, how he does it. Okay, we're there with you all this time. And he says, listen, you know him, and you've seen him, because I've been with you. And we go, duh. To which another one of the disciples, Philip, says, Jesus, just show us the Father. Just show him to us, and we're going to be satisfied. We'll be content. We'll be happy. That's all we've been waiting for. Just show us the Father, and we will be thrilled out of our minds. That's what we're looking for. Now, if you were Jesus, having known what we know about Jesus' life, but what he poured into these people's lives, what he taught these guys, what he said to these guys. How would you feel if somebody said, after you just said, you've known him, you've seen him, you got the little arrows pointing at you here, right here, and somebody says, just show him to him? How would you feel at that moment? Because that's exactly how Jesus feels, and he says, listen, Philip, have I been with you all this time, and still you don't know who I am? You ever feel like that? You've been with somebody, you thought you were friends, and then, they say something or do something that totally kind of says they don't really understand you, know you, and it's like, what's up with this? I mean, this is somebody that Jesus, these are guys that he handpicked. These are guys that every day he sort of just poured his life and gave them everything he could to make them not just successful, but to help them understand what he was doing. And all this time together, and you still haven't figured this out. He says, listen, anyone who has seen me has seen the Father. So why are you asking? Why are you asking me to show him to you? I mean, you can almost hear the pain in Jesus' voice, And we kind of understand a little bit of this because we'd say, okay, I get the idea that Jesus and God are one, that Jesus is representing God, that if I've seen Jesus, I've seen God, the Father. But why would they ask that? How could they have missed that? See, it's easy to understand how Jesus could be one with the Father. But to flip it around and think that the Father was one with Jesus. That this wasn't just he's a representation of that, but he's it. And he asked this incredible statement. Come on, guys. Don't you believe? Don't you believe that I am in the Father and the Father is in me? After all this time, don't you believe that? I mean, what else do I need to do to convince you of that? The words I speak, they're not my own. But they're the words of my Father who lives in me and does his work through me. They're his words. Just believe. That's all I'm asking. Just believe that I am in the Father and the Father is in me. That's all he's asking them to believe. But it's a hard belief because when you've been with somebody for a long time, it's easy to see them in a way different than when you haven't been with them. And they have seen Jesus. But they think, yeah, he's got this great connection with God. But are they really totally convinced that this is a one-on-one connection? This is an equal connection. This is a bonded connection. So he said, at least believe, or, and I love this last statement, if you can't believe that the Father's in me and he and I are one, at least believe because what you've seen me do. Can't believe me from what I've said, can't believe me from who I am, at least believe when you've seen the stuff I've done, go, there's got to be something there. Because how many times do we not get it? How many times you've had a conversation with somebody, and at some point in that conversation you recognize they have no clue what you're talking about? Anybody had that kind of conversation? And the more you try to explain it, the more it gets kind of just, you just kind of want to just say, I don't know what else I can do here. But I love this prophecy that Jesus says, listen, I'm going to go prepare a place for you. When it's done, I'm coming to get you. Because in the midst of it, there's this kind of mucky, yucky story. It comes in the midst of a story that his closest guys, the guys closest to him, don't really understand what he's talking about. For us, it's this great promise, right, Jared? We kind of go, oh, man, it's the idea that Jesus returns and we got to go and get out of this place. And We get to experience stuff we've never experienced. We get to see stuff we've never seen. We get away from all the pain and the suffering and the tears and all the problems down here. There's this great pull for us, but for them, it was confusion. They just didn't get it. And I love the fact that when we don't get it, that doesn't change anything about who he is or how he sees us. Because it isn't always about us understanding everything about him completely. Because then it's about us. But it's about him, what he does, and who he is, and what that promise, that prophecy is. And right now, Jesus is preparing a place. And the good news is, the reason he has not come back is apparently he keeps having to add more rooms. Which means people keep deciding they want to be part of his family, which means he's got a whole other room to make, right? Which is good news. We sometimes look at it as Seventh-day Adventist Christians, how come Jesus hasn't come back yet? And we bemoan the fact. We look at ourselves. We've failed God. Is that what he says? He says, no, here's the plan. You can't go with me now because I got a job to do. I'm going to go get the place ready. When I get the place ready, I'm coming to get you. And the more people that join, the more places you got to come up with. And that's not a bad thing. That's a good thing. I love this statement from Corrie ten Boom. If you don't know who she is, Google it. But that's really what prophecy is about. Even this great prophecy, when Jesus has this great assurance that he's going to prepare a place for us. When he gets done, he's going to come back. And if it wasn't that way, he would have told us. He wouldn't have sort of dangled that out, because you don't see any other place in the Bible that he talks about that. This is the one place where he says, this is what I'm going to go do. And I'm going to do it as quick as possible, because I want to be together. Because that's really what prophecy is about. Trusting our unknown future to a known God. Because how many of us know what the future is going to hold? Nobody? Death and taxes, I'm going to put my hand up for that one. I know those two things are going to happen. Right? But we know what I mean. There's all these other details. I'm guessing that for the vast majority, there may only be one or two. There may be a couple of folks here that have actually had their future plan when they were a kid and kind of worked out and done it, all right, are doing everything, pretty much like they thought. But for the vast majority of us, and for somebody whose car alarm's going off at the moment, you had no idea what the future was going to hold, did you? I mean, some of us are on not just plan B, we're kind of starting, we're in the double Bs, double Cs now, we're kind of working on that whole list. And I love this story because it tells me again that there are times when I don't get it. That when I don't understand what Jesus is talking, I don't understand what God's talking about. Because my picture has gotten so big that it's kind of blocked out his bigger picture. But that doesn't dissuade from who I am to him. Or what he's doing right now for me and for you. Of getting the place ready. In fact, at the end of this sort of story, Jesus talking to his disciples that night, he makes an interesting statement that I think is a great definition of prophecy no matter where you find it. Because Jesus says it a couple of times, actually just a few verses before we looked at the story. And at the end of this sort of process of talking to the disciples that night, he makes this statement. He says, I've told you this now, before it happens, so this is a prophecy, so that when it happens, you will believe. Now here's the problem. That's not actually what the verse says. Because in the original language, it doesn't say so that when it happens, you will believe. This is not a So when this happens, you have proof, something to say, okay, it's happened now, now I'll believe. It actually, in the original language, says, so that you will continue to believe. Which is a whole other thing, isn't it? Because this isn't that prophecy is going to happen, something's going to get foretold, and then it's going to be fulfilled, and I can say, okay, it's happening now, so I can believe. This is saying, no, 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 you've believed all along. This is just to kind of say, it's all good. You're going in the right direction. Stuff's going to work out because it's unfolding. This is not a thing to hang your hat on, to believe in. This is a thing that just confirms what you've already believed in a greater way. And that is that God is in control. Even when you don't understand what he's saying. Even when it's clear from him, and it may be clear to other people, because when we read this story, it's clear to us, isn't it? The disciples are a bunch of idiots. I mean, how could they miss what Jesus is saying, right? We look at it and say, how could they? How could they? But the reality is, it could happen the same way it happens in your life. I mean, you've seen it. You've seen other people's lives. You think, really? How are you missing this, you know? You got this. Really? But when you're in the midst of it, you can miss it all. And here's the question I want to ask you as we wind this all up today. So I think for all of us, there's something. For some of us, it's very clear I don't want to hear that. You know, for some of us, we live our lives, you know, la, 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 you know. And other of us, we live our lives like, I'm not really sure I understand that. I wish, explain it to me, and it gets explained. It just doesn't kind of work. It's like me with electrical work. Lori and I have done some remodeling different houses. We're currently still remodeling the current house. And me with electricity, it does not make sense. I've had a friend that was an electrician come over, sit down and explain it to me. It still doesn't make sense. I just know when I haven't turned the breaker off and I touch those two wires, it is not a good thing. And I don't understand how come when it goes this way it does one thing. Honestly, it's one of those things, it just doesn't make sense. But I know it's true. Because it makes sense to him and it can work when I flip the switch on. But when I do it, it's, I'm flipping on the wrong things or nothing works. It's just, it's embarrassing. But what is the thing? Where you're like the disciples. God has been saying something and maybe somebody else thinks it's clear and you're kind of like, I just don't see it. And I want you to answer that question for yourself because I want to remind you, it's not so much about getting clarity in the answer, but in the fact that whether you understand it or not, that God is still in control. That you're still his child. I mean, Jesus doesn't look at the disciples that night and say, guys, because you don't get it, you three, I'll get three other guys, Philip, Thomas, the two guys that spoke up, and Peter, might as well throw him out because he's just always trouble. Let's start, let's get a few other guys. Come on in, we'll do some internships, we'll figure some other guys. He doesn't do that, right? These are still his guys. These are still the guys that within a few hours are going to leave him high and dry. They're the guys that before it happens, Jesus says to them, by the way, when this is all said and done, I'm going to prepare a place for you. And that's going to be hard to believe here in about 24 hours or 36 hours. But that does not change the fact of what I'm doing for you. Even though at the moment you're clueless to it all. So I hope you get some hope out of that prophecy. Some hope that it's not just about understanding always all the details, but understanding the context. That when Jesus says this is at one of the toughest moments of his life. But he has the ability to look away from his life into what he can do for them. And what he wants to promise us today. Don't get overwhelmed. Don't get frustrated. Don't get agitated. You believe in God? Believe also in Jesus. because there's lots of rooms in his Father's house. And that's what he's doing. He's preparing a place, and if he wasn't that way, he would have told us, but he didn't tell us. He said, that's what I'm going to do. And the final part of that promise is that, listen, if he goes, he's going to come back. He'll come back when he's got just enough rooms for just the amount of people that have said, I want to be part of his family. And I hope if you haven't made that decision to be part of his family, that you'll at least stay open to the possibilities of what that might look like.